In the not-so-distant future, a satellite capsule known as Pilgrim is returning from Mars with soil samples that scientists hope will confirm the existence of alien life. Unfortunately, as luck would have it, Pilgrim gets pummeled by asteroids, causing it to veer off course. Now, the crew of the International Space Station must play cosmic catch and retrieve the sample. After helping Rory suit up for a spacewalk, the rest of the crew scrambles to their stations to assist him in the rescue. Rory floats outside, carefully guiding the station's mechanical arm to intercept Pilgrim, which suddenly comes hurtling toward them at breakneck speed, causing the entire station to shake like a Martian maraca. For a tense moment, the crew fears something went wrong, but Rory triumphantly reveals that he has successfully snagged Pilgrim. Later, a rather excited astrobiologist carefully begins testing the sample and is thrilled to discover what appears to be an almost fossilized, single-cell organism in the soil. He tries to reanimate the little critter, but it remains stubbornly unresponsive. So he decides to play mad scientist by mimicking Mars' atmosphere and adding a growth hormone. This time it works like a charm, and the organism starts moving. The crew celebrates the discovery of the first proof of life beyond Earth. And soon, news outlets on Earth are buzzing with this out-of-this-world find. The crew even appears on TV, showing off their work on the station and explaining to curious kids how astronauts, handle their business in space. A particular school is given the honor of naming the organism, and the kids, in their infinite wisdom, decide to call it Calvin, sparking celebrations in the streets. Sometime later, Dr. Miranda checks on David's health and expresses her concern. David has been on the station for 473 days, about to set a new record, but his atrophy has accelerated, and he's nearing his radiation limit. David, however, couldn't care less. After serving in the military and fighting in a war, he prefers the company of stars, where people aren't nasty to each other. The next day, he discovers that Calvin has grown rapidly and now consists of hundreds of cells, each developing a neural network. In other words, Calvin is now a multitasking genius. Every cell is simultaneously a muscle cell, nerve cell, and photoreceptive cell. Hugh describes Calvin as all brain, all muscle, and all eyes. When Calvin starts growing appendages, Hugh decides to make contact, and the cells respond by moving into interesting shapes. Calvin's version of waving hello. Later, during dinner, Engineer Show watches a live stream of his wife giving birth and meets his newborn daughter. The crew congratulates him, and Kat gives him a book so he can do story time via video calls. After dinner, David uses special software to check his body for any potential issues, while Show checks on Calvin. The little guy may be small, but he's got a proper body now, and even climbs onto Show's finger like a pet. A few weeks later, the crew is jolted by an alarm coming from the lab. Rory rushes inside and quickly fixes the malfunction, but Miranda scolds him, reminding him that they're dealing with an unknown entity. After a few more days, Calvin suddenly becomes completely inactive, and the crew suspects it may have gone into hibernation due to the change in air pressure caused by the malfunction. Miranda is relieved. Calvin had been growing a little too fast for her liking. While Calvin is inactive, the crew takes the opportunity to reinforce the lab's security, making sure it's sealed off at all times. Later, while Miranda is checking on Show's legs, he confesses that he feels guilty, thinking his mistake may have affected Calvin. After discussing some options, Show decides to stimulate Calvin with a very low voltage of electricity to see if he'll wake up. The first few tries don't work, but suddenly Calvin springs to life and grabs onto Show's hand with surprising strength, breaking the electric wand in the process. Show tries to pull his hand out of the box, but Calvin holds on with the determination of a toddler who doesn't want to leave the playground. Calvin then starts squeezing so hard that Show's hand contorts into disturbing shapes. The crew wants to rush in to help, but Miranda refuses, fearing they would be in danger too. Suddenly, Show's head hits the box, and he passes out as Calvin finally lets go, revealing the mess that Show's hand has become. Calvin tests the glove, realizes it can't break it, so it grabs the electric wand and uses it to pierce the glove, breaking free. Now unleashed, Calvin immediately goes after the lab rat, devouring it in mere seconds. Clearly, he's not vegan. While Calvin is distracted by his meal, Rory seizes the opportunity to enter the lab and rescue Show, passing his unconscious body to the crew. However, Calvin quickly jumps onto Rory's leg, forcing the crew to seal the lab again, leaving him inside. Rory grabs an oxygen candle and tries to burn Calvin, who immediately jumps away and tries to hide. Kat gives Rory permission to eliminate the creature, so Rory grabs the incinerator and starts chasing Calvin around the lab. But no matter how many times Rory hits it with flames, it's never enough to actually kill the persistent little alien. Eventually, Rory runs out of fuel and opens a container where Calvin was last seen, only to find it empty. Suddenly, Calvin jumps onto Rory's face and enters his mouth. Apparently, Calvin likes his food fresh. The crew watches in horror as Rory is slowly killed from the inside, his lifeless body floating with blood eerily suspended in zero gravity. To make matters worse, the incinerator floats away and triggers the fire alarm, filling the lab with suppressant gas. Calvin seizes the chance to escape, squeezing through one of the valves, now 10 times larger and more terrifying. After wrapping up Rory's body, Kat sends out a distress call. Unfortunately, Sho discovers that communications are down. The transmitter is on the fritz. With no other option, they need to head outside to fix it and get in touch with Earth. Kat suits up for a spacewalk and, upon reaching the transmitter, finds it's overheated. When she opens the coolant chamber, she's greeted by the sight of an empty space. Turns out Calvin had a midnight snack. Suddenly, the little, well, not so little anymore, alien pops out of the coolant chamber and attaches itself to Kat, clearly looking for a way into her suit. Despite Calvin's new and improved size, the suit holds strong, and it can't break in. Kat quickly closes the coolant valve and rushes back to the airlock, but she soon notices a sloshing sensation inside her suit. Calvin has damaged her coolant tube, causing liquid to leak in. With visibility rapidly decreasing, Kat takes a leap of faith and jumps toward the airlock to speed things up. It's a risky move, and she ends up bouncing off the station like a pinball before finally reaching safety. David suits up and rushes to help her. However, Kat's helmet is filling with water and she's already drowning. She grabs the airlock's lever and holds on to it so David can open it. In a few more seconds, Kat sadly drowns, and the crew has to watch her body float away, taking Calvin with her. Unfortunately, Calvin catches on the plan and jumps on top of the station before the body goes too far away. How smart is this guy? The crew cries for their commander until he reminds everyone they need to do something to keep Calvin out of the ship, since it's obviously still alive and unaffected by the vacuum, since the thrusters are the only way in. They keep an eye on the temperature sensors to keep track of Calvin. Whenever the alien gets too close to a thruster, Sho fires it up to blast Calvin away. But all the firing and shaking causes the station to veer off course. With no other choice, Sho uses the last of the fuel to stabilize their orbit, which unfortunately gives Calvin the chance to sneak back inside. Later, Sho proposes a theory. Calvin's species must have ruled Mars for millions of years, going into hibernation when the planet's atmosphere collapsed. He suggests they simulate the same lack of atmosphere to force Calvin into hibernation again. The crew agrees and retreats to a capsule, sealing themselves off before expelling the oxygen from the rest of the station. While they work on reinforcing the lab's security, Hugh suddenly feels something in the shadows and starts feeling unwell. Miranda tries to check on him, but he insists he's fine. The next few hours are spent in anxious waiting. The crew grieves their lost friends, and Hugh blames himself for what happened. But David said it was team decision to take Calvin. He also points out that Calvin is just a creature trying to survive, and to do so, it needs to feed. Suddenly, Hugh passes out, and the computer shows his vitals are dropping. As they rush to stabilize him with a defibrillator, they notice something moving under Hugh's suit. Unzipping it, they're horrified to discover Calvin feasting on Hugh's leg, which he never felt. Miranda tries to shock Calvin with the defibrillator, but it only makes the alien float up, showing off just how much it has evolved. The crew immediately flees, but in the chaos, they accidentally split up. Sho finds himself alone in a sleeping pod with Calvin trying to break in. Luckily, the creature gets bored and wanders off. Meanwhile, David and Miranda return to Hugh, who doesn't have much time left. He asks his friends to lift him up so he can feel what floating is like one last time, and then he dies. While saying their goodbyes, they notice a beeping light on the screen. Calvin accidentally swallowed Hugh's tracker. Now they can follow its position and make a plan. Calvin moves all over the station, eventually returning to Hugh's body, but realizes too late that it's a trap. David and Miranda quickly seal the door, locking it inside, and purge the oxygen from the room in an attempt to suffocate it. However, instead of getting in contact with help, the station starts getting pummeled by something external. Miranda reveals this is the final emergency firewall. The shuttle isn't here to save them. It's here to push them into deep space, keeping Calvin from ever reaching Earth. In the sleeping chamber, Sho hears the announcement and mistakenly thinks they're being rescued. He exits the pod, leaving the hatch open behind him, and heads to the docking area. Miranda and David rush to warn him, but it's too late. Calvin sneaks up behind Sho just as he opens the hatch. The open hatch causes the station to start decompressing, sucking Sho out into space, while Calvin clings to his leg. Miranda grabs Sho's hand, trying to pull him back in, but when Calvin reaches Sho's arm, Sho makes the ultimate sacrifice, letting go of Miranda to keep Calvin from getting back inside. Sho is sucked into space, but Calvin, ever persistent, manages to latch onto the station once more. It tries to grab Miranda next, but she shocks it with a tool, pushing it away, and she and David make it back inside, sealing the door behind them. When they look out the window, they see the station falling apart, with debris crashing into each other, causing further destruction. David checks the computer and discovers they're losing life support. The temperature and oxygen levels are dropping rapidly. To make matters worse, all this chaos has sent the station hurtling toward Earth, with only about 30 minutes before they re-enter the atmosphere. Unfortunately, they know they won't survive re-entry, and they can't reach the escape pods without Calvin attacking them. As the duo comes to terms with their fate, they find the book Sho bought for his daughter. David decides to read it aloud, and as he says goodbye, he gets an idea. Since Calvin is on the hunt for oxygen, they could lure it into an escape pod using oxygen candles. David volunteers to launch himself with Calvin into deep space, giving Miranda the chance to reach a different pod and land on Earth safely. Miranda protests the idea of a sacrifice, but David reminds her that he's a pilot and that he prefers the solitude of space over the chaos of Earth. As the plan unfolds, the capsule disconnects from the station and flies away. However, with a jolt of tension, debris strikes both pods, causing them to start malfunctioning. As Miranda struggles desperately with her controls, David tries his best to maintain his pod's trajectory, but Calvin's sudden grab of David's hands makes him scream in pain. After a series of shaky maneuvers, one pod drifts off into the vast, cold expanse of deep space, while the other lands precariously in the middle of the ocean. Fortunately, fishing boats quickly surround it to offer assistance. Miranda is now lost in space, and Calvin is left with an entire planet to surprise. I would say he is unfortunate to land in Asia, if you know what I mean. Jokes aside, have you subscribed? If not, make sure to subscribe now.